So, I want to thank Blair and Nicky, our speakers and presenters today, for taking time out of their busy schedules to come and share with us some of what they've experienced, some of what they've learned, what they're doing in this very important area. Blair is a local guy from the East Side and has an MPA from UW, and he is the founder of the Washington Initiative for Boys and Men that we'll hear more about. And we also have Nicky, who is the executive director of Journeymen Institute and has done a ton of things with being a thought leader, facilitator, and mentor, helping boys grow, leading mentorship programs in these kinds of important and really needed ways. So hopefully you'll hear more from both of them, but I'm so glad that they're taking the time to be here and excited for what we can learn from both of them today. So let's go ahead and give them a hand.
Microphone. Very good. Okay. Check. Well, it's a pleasure to be here with you all today, and thank you to Braver Angels for organizing this event. It is special and unique when I get these opportunities to present to folks. So I'll start by just identifying myself as, yes, the founder of Washington Initiative for Boys and Men, advocacy for our male population in service of ensuring that everyone has a chance to be well and to do well. That's my calling, that's my passion. For my day job, I work for the city of Kirkland, so I'm a government worker working on transportation projects and programs in the Public Works Department over there on the east side. This photo, in the middle, you see a man named Evaristo Salas. And Mr. Salas, 2 years ago, was released from Airway Heights Prison outside of Spokane after spending 26 years behind bars for a crime that he did not commit. To be clear, Mr. Salas, 2 years ago, was let out of prison after he was exonerated. He served 26 years of a 34-year sentence for, he was being punished for something that he was innocent of. And the two women in the photo with him are lawyers who helped him get exonerated. Now, I think spending 1 week without my freedom for something that I was innocent of would be maddening. Imagine spending 26 years. As the leader of Washington Initiative for Boys and Men, one of the roles that I play is what I think of as an advocacy journalist. And I love going after stories and angles that other media outlets and advocacy organizations just wouldn't have strong reasons to go after. I love to ask questions and to pursue answers to inquiries that most people maybe haven't thought of before. So one question that I became curious about when I learned about Evaristo Salas was this. Among the total number of years spent wrongfully imprisoned by people in Washington, how many of those years have been spent by men? In other words, how many wasted years or lost years has our legal system taken from the lives of men who were later exonerated? So what I did is I went to the National Registry of Exonerations and I filtered for people in Washington and I filtered by sex. And what I found is that since 1989, which is as far back as the data go, men in Washington have spent a total of 275 years wrongfully imprisoned, which is 94% of all the wrongfully imprisoned years spent by people in Washington who ended up being innocent of the crimes for which they were being punished. Now, everyone knows that more men commit crimes that will land you in prison, but from a posture of compassion toward men, I think it's an interesting insight that also more men are punished for crimes that they are innocent of. Here's something else interesting that happened when I was doing this inquiry. When I was looking into this topic, I made a call to the Washington Innocence Project, which is a nonprofit organization that has lawyers that help take on cases like Mr. Salas's case and ultimately free the innocent. You can see the woman on the right in this photo is wearing a shirt that says Washington Innocence Project. So I called them when I was in the midst of gathering as many facts as I could about exonerations because I wanted to produce as accurate of a finding as I could, and I figured they might have some data that would help me. I was on the phone with one of their staff, and unprompted, I mentioned to her that I'm involved in advocacy focused on ensuring that we're adequately supporting our boys and men. When I said that, she responded like this: "Oh, because they don't already have a ton of resources." So she snickered like that. Now, this is an individual who works for an organization that helps to free the wrongfully convicted, the large majority of whom are men. In fact, on the website of the Washington Innocence Project, they have 16 what they call freedom stories, which are stories of people in Washington who were exonerated. And all 16 of their freedom stories are about men. Now, granted, the employee's sarcastic comment was off the cuff, and she might not stand by it if she was challenged on it. On the call, I just let it go. But I will say it seemed like she was dismissing wholesale the need for advocacy for our male population. And if I were to speculate on why she made that comment, my guess is that in her mind, the concept of boys and men is associated with labels like advantaged and privileged, and maybe even oppressor. Her view of men might be along the lines of what's laid out in this chart about privilege and oppression, where you can see in the middle that cisgender men are categorized as a group that is, quote, given more power, access, and advantages monolithically. This chart, by the way, comes from a program that is implemented in some Seattle high schools. Back when I viewed boys and men monolithically as the automatic recipients of gender-based advantages, and when I viewed girls and women monolithically as lacking gender-based advantages, I probably would have rolled my eyes at the idea that males need male-focused advocacy. I might have scoffed at an organization called Washington Initiative for Boys and Men. Today, though, here is my position on this. In 2025, in Washington State, girls and boys, men and women, they have a mix of gender-related advantages and disadvantages. Neither men nor women are an oppressed class, and our society does not privilege or advantage males or females in a way that, on the whole, makes life easier for either girls or for boys, for men or for women. There are advantages and disadvantages to be found all around, so this is my position, and I see a lot of evidence to support it. And if I'm correct in that position, then it stands to reason that both sexes need and deserve advocacy. Both sexes need and deserve advocacy. So I created Washington Initiative for Boys and Men 5 years ago, and I'm so passionate about this work because I saw, on the one hand, a wide range of struggles and disparities affecting the male population, and on the other hand, I saw a severe lack of high-quality, sustained advocacy for boys and for men in the political and public arenas. With WIBM, our vision is thriving boys and men showing up for their communities. We are advancing human flourishing by spotlighting problems boys and men are facing and stirring leaders and the public to act. We want to get the well-being of boys and men included more on the agendas of researchers, educators, politicians, philanthropists, leaders of nonprofits, and ordinary citizens. We are forward-looking, fact-based, compassionate, inclusive, and nonpartisan. And we care about the issues of all Washington's boys and men of all ages and all backgrounds. So what does WIBM actually do? What are the activities that we're up to? There are two main things. One is what I think of as advocacy journalism, so writing articles and making videos. This screenshot is the homepage of the Substack website for Washington Initiative for Boys and Men. Substack is a platform that is for writers, and it combines the ability, basically a blog with an email list. So on about a weekly basis, I put out a new article or video. I used to send those out through a MailChimp email platform, and now I just use Substack. So each time I publish a video or an article, it goes out as an email to those who subscribe. And I invite any of you to subscribe. So I make articles and videos, and then it's grassroots political advocacy. So meeting with policymakers and community leaders to grow this advocacy network or coalition of folks who agree that it's reasonable and in fact needed that we should have some advocacy for boys and for men. I'll talk more about each of these now. So here are some examples of the advocacy journalism that I'm up to. I'll show you 4 quick articles. With each article, I try to make a graphic that can be posted to social media. And so on the left side, the headline is State Law Overlooks Health Disparities Affecting Men and Boys, with the subheadline, Sex-Based Exclusion in Legislation Adopted in 2006 Could be fixed in 2026 if enough people ask for it. And basically what I just kind of discovered accidentally is that there was legislation during this 2025 legislative session this year to make some changes to Washington's Health Disparities Council. We've had a Health Disparities Council since 2026, but what I found is that that Disparities Council was charged with addressing health disparities affecting essentially people of color and women. But it excluded the health disparities affecting the male population, men. And I think with the number of health disparities affecting our male population today, that we should strive for inclusion for health concerns for men with our Health Disparities Council. The story to the right of there, City of Bellevue recognizes men's struggles, celebrates men's contributions. So I connected with some city council members in Bellevue, and one of them said, yeah, I'd like to participate in sponsoring a proclamation recognizing International Men's Day. There's an International Men's Day. It's in November each year, so it's coming up on November 19th. And Bellevue was the second ever government entity in the state to recognize it. It's pretty common for city councils, county councils to do proclamations recognizing all kinds of things. The city of Ellensburg in 2022, I believe, was the first government entity in our state to recognize International Men's Day, and then the city of Bellevue did it the next year. I had this aspiration that every year I'd try to facilitate a new city or county recognizing International Men's Day. Didn't quite accomplish that, but maybe 2026. I don't think there's going to be a proclamation here in 2025. A couple more stories. On the left hand, you can see Arian Mobasser. What an interesting guy. Arian Mobasser has a very unique role because he is the leader of the Men's Resource Center at the University of Oregon. Who knew that we have a public university in our country, especially one as large as University of Oregon, that has a Men's Resource Center? So I said, someone's got to do a story about this. Like, has anyone interviewed Arian? Is there like a podcast episode about his experience? Because I went to the University of Washington. I know we don't have a men's resource center. We do have a women's resource center and other kinds of resource centers. Maybe UW should have one. Or what college in our state would be the first with a men's resource center? Let me talk to Arian, find out his story, and see how it's going. So that was a great interview I conducted with Arian. And on the right, I'm highlighting the government's new report on the status of fatherhood in Washington shows they see problems. What happens next? Washington State has a Washington Fatherhood Council. And this is a screenshot of the front page of their report that they issued on the state of fatherhood in Washington. They spent a year studying this. They did a great job. And in fact, Ann Stone is here with us today. Thank you, Ann, for all your work advancing fatherhood in the interest of families and children. So I make articles and then grassroots political advocacy. Real quick, I'll run through some of these photos. On the top left, some of you might recognize there's 4 folks in there. On the left, that's Richard Reeves, who's the founder of the American Institute for Boys and Men, and the author of the 2022 book called Of Boys and Men, Why the Modern Male is Struggling, Why It Matters, and What to Do About It. And here we are in Olympia, speaking with legislators. Next to Richard is Stefan Blanford, who until recently was the director of the progressive children-focused organization called Children's Alliance. So he was helping us speak with legislators about boys and men's well-being. And then Joe Cook, next to Stefan, is an advocacy partner of mine who works with youth. Other photos here. This is Democratic State Senator John Lovick, who's been the prime sponsor of our legislation to create a state commission on boys and men, going back a few years now. And the bottom left is the other longstanding prime sponsor on the House side. That's Republican State Representative Mary Dye. Next to her is, in the photo with the woman with the red jacket, that's Ann Silvers, who's a counselor. She's been very helpful and involved in this work. Next to her is Jerome Hunter, who is an educator that created the Seattle School for Boys. We had a Seattle School for Boys for a period of time. It was at middle school because Jerome recognized, and many have recognized, that these middle school years, having a curriculum, having educators that are informed about working with boys is a positive thing. And then on the bottom right, this is me standing with a bunch of urologists. And we're down at the Capitol because the Washington State Urology Society is one of many organizations that have endorsed the legislation to create a state commission on boys and men. To the extent that there's a men's health specialty in the medical field, urologists are that. And they chose the Commission on Boys and Men bill as one of 3 bills that they were going to highlight as their priorities when speaking with legislators. And they got a lot of meetings. I mean, it's impressive. They met with so many legislators, and they included me in their meetings. I like to keep track of legislators that we've connected with. And so this is a map of Washington State's 49 legislative districts. And the districts in orange are those where we volunteer advocates have had a conversation about boys and men's issues with at least one of the 3 legislators that represent that district. There are 3 representing each district because 1 senator and 2 House reps. So this is 46 out of the 49. There's only 3 that are not highlighted in orange, so there's only 3 districts where we haven't yet had at least a conversation with one of the members that represents that district. And then these are the districts where at least one of the representatives from that district is a sponsor of the Commission on Boys and Men bill. And you can see good representation from Eastern and Western Washington among the 24 legislators who signed on as sponsors of the bill. And I want to acknowledge one of these districts is North Kitsap. It's District 26, and a state legislator who's here with us today is one of those co-sponsors. Thank you, Representative Addison Richards. What?
South Kitsap in Gig Harbor.
South Kitsap in Gig Harbor. Thank you. Thank you for the correction. But District 26 is correct.
That's right. Yeah.
Thank you.
North Kitsap is 23rd.
North Kitsap is 23rd District, where we also have friends in that district, including Representative Greg Nance and others. So I mentioned 24. Here they are. And what do we notice? A great collection of Republicans and Democrats, House reps and senators. This is 14 Democrats and 10 Republicans as of 2025 signing on to legislation proposing to create the nation's first state-level commission to be concerned with monitoring the well-being of our male population and making recommendations for improving outcomes. I mentioned the endorsing organizations. I'll go through a few here. On the left-hand side, you can see medical-related organizations, including recently, I'm proud to say, the Washington State Medical Association passed a proclamation supporting the creation of a Washington State Commission on Boys and Men. The King County Medical Society as well, the Washington State Psychiatric Association. The second group there is suicide prevention organizations. So many mental health and suicide prevention organizations have endorsed this legislation. The third grouping is a sample of the labor unions that have endorsed this legislation, including firefighters and construction workers. And the bottom left is youth mentoring organizations, including the Journeymen Institute. We'll hear soon from Nicky. The Seattle Cares Mentoring and the Let Me Run Boys Wellness Program. Thank you, Jen, for being here as well, and Michael. The next grouping, more mental health. I'm excited to have the Women's Healing and Empowerment Network as an endorsing organization supporting the creation of a Commission on Boys and Men. This is an organization based in Spokane that uniquely has a program under the Women's Healing and Empowerment Network called Men of Compassion. Men of Compassion. It's basically a men's support group. Tribal groups. The Affiliated Tribes of Northwest Indians represents 33 tribes in the state, and that umbrella organization passed a proclamation expressing support for creating a commission on boys and men. And then fatherhood-oriented organizations as well are supporting. So what are they seeing? These organizations, these legislators, what are they seeing that persuades them that this is something worth getting behind? Because it's pretty novel, it's pretty new. There is no commission on boys and men at a state level, anywhere in the country or almost in the Western world. So what are they seeing that has them wanting to create a commission where it would focus on mental and physical health of boys and men, education and skills, jobs, careers, and financial health, fatherhood, family, and relationships, and experiences of males in court systems? These are, according to the latest version of the legislation, these are the proposed focus areas for a commission on boys and men. So the next section of slides, I'm going to go through some statistics. But before I do so, I want to acknowledge that many of us don't need to see statistics to know that many boys and men are struggling. We've either lived it ourselves or our loved ones have. Having said that, policymakers, decision makers, budget writers, they often want to see numbers. They want to see statistics. So we will go through some. And I'll use this first slide as an orientation of what the next slides will look like. So the color green always represents the male population of Washington State. Almost all these statistics will be Washington specific, so not national statistics, but local. The topic of the issue or the problem will be at the title of the graphic, and I'll show some graph. There's a photo illustrating what the issue is, and the source of the data is across the bottom. So this first slide shows us that when looking at deaths from drug overdoses, most recent data available, starting in 2019, the raw numbers went up and up, concerningly high. And not just the raw numbers, but also the percentage of deaths from drug overdoses that were men and boys also went up from 65% in 2019 to as high as 73% in 2023. And as of May, last time I checked, 76% of recorded drug overdose deaths in Washington in 2025, as of that time, had been males. Victims of suicide are almost 80% men and boys. Youth victims of suicide, 3 out of 4 boys and young men. I wanted to look at the history. What do we know historically? Has the ratio of male suicides to female suicides always been as high as it is today? I think there's growing awareness that men and boys die by suicide at around between 3 and 4 times as frequently as women and girls do. Has it always been this way? And fortunately, I was able to find year-by-year reports. Going back to 1960 was the first year that they had sex disaggregated statistics on suicide. And I thought it's worth noting that the ratio of male suicide rate to female suicide rate was as low as in the 2.1 range in the 70s. It went up as high as 4.6 in the 90s, and currently sits around 3.8, close to 4. This is an example of an inquiry that I became curious about, that I don't know another media source or advocacy organization that would necessarily look for those statistics and map it in this way to show a disparity like this. Among our 13,000 or so people in Washington who are in prison, 94% of them are men. And I'll just note here, cost per incarcerated individual, $75,000 a year. $75,000 average cost per incarcerated individual per year. So someone mentioned to me, hey, you should try, if legislators are saying we don't have the money for this, you should try mentioning that for the cost of keeping 4 or 5 men out of prison a year, you could pay for a commission on boys and men. Among youth and juvenile rehabilitation, it's the same similar percentage, over 90% males. This snapshot in time as of December 31st, 2024, there were 404 boys and young men in juvenile rehabilitation. They also have a longer average stay than their female peers in rehabilitation. I went to an event where I heard a state senator say that it costs 4 times as much to incarcerate a youth as an adult. I thought, 4 times as much? I want to fact check that. Where did that come from? That seems really high. And so I did fact check it, and I found the budget document where that comes from. And you can see as of 2025, the budgeted amount, average cost per incarcerated individual in juvenile rehabilitation, $267,000 a year, compared to $75,000 for adults in adult prisons. So in this graphic, I say males are over 90% of those confined in juvenile rehabilitation and prisons. We need to do a better job setting up our boys and young men for success. We also need more men in the mental health counseling fields. Currently, it sits around 25%. I think this number is going to be going down. I think fewer men are choosing mental health to study that in college. Of course, fewer men relative to women are even going to college and getting the kind of credential that would result in becoming a certified mental health counselor. Among our homeless population, 70% of our unsheltered homeless are men. And then this statistics from the Seattle Times, they said men are 85% of deaths among people experiencing homelessness in King County. Sticking with King County, you can see this uptick in between 2022 and 2024 among our homeless population. An uptick not just in the raw numbers from 8,600 to 11,000 between 2022 to 2024, but also an uptick slightly in the percentage of the homeless population who are male. And then if we want to look at specifically unsheltered homeless, so those roughing it, as they say, living out in the streets, it went from 69% men in 2022 to 75% men in 2024 in King County. This is, I thought, an interesting finding, so I wanted to include it. Among single homeowners, men are actually the minority, somewhat slightly, but it is an interesting nuance to conversations around wealth and power. There are various reasons why men would be 43% of single homeowners in Washington, including that they die sooner, so their property, may end up being owned by a woman who's their spouse. But it's an interesting finding, I thought. Men are a slight majority of those lacking medical insurance. And then let's look at the life expectancy gender gap. Another inquiry I was able to do using annual reports from the State Department of Health. 1980 was the first year that they produced sex-differentiated life expectancy estimates. And in 1980, the life expectancy gender gap was 7 years. Going down to in 2015 or so, it dropped to 4 years. And now in more recent years, you can see the green line going up, showing that males are expected to die 5+ years younger than their female peers. Men are the large majority of those who are killed in the act of earning money, providing for themselves or their family. In this 5-year period, the most recent 5-year period of data available, almost 400 men in Washington died on the job. You can see this note here. Remarkably, in 2022, there were 103 workplace fatalities, which is a particularly deadly year for workplace fatalities, and all 103 of those workplace fatalities were men. Let's look at voter turnout. Some people know, not everyone knows, that at every age grouping, women vote at higher rates than men. They have higher voter turnout. And I want to look in particular at young men, because young men have been in the news lately, if some of you have noticed. And so I went back to as early as 2008 and then looked at each of the general elections since then and looked at voter turnout for the age cohort 18 to 24, disaggregated by sex. And what we found is that in 2024, there was the largest gender gap in voter turnout among this age cohort that we've seen for as long as we have data. And same thing if we're going to go up in age cohort from 18 to 24 to now 25 to 34. Same story, the largest gap in voter turnout in Washington state for that age cohort that we've seen since 2008 or earlier. Again, it's an interesting nuance to the conversation around political power. Who has power? Who lacks power? Voter turnout is an interesting thing to look at. When we look at single-parent households using census data for Washington state, we can see that 25% of those single-parent-headed households are headed by men, with the other 75% headed by women. And to me, what that means is that there's a lot of boys out there, many more boys than girls, who are not having a same-sex parent regularly in their lives, guiding them into healthy adulthood, showing them how to be a man or a woman. And it's sad for daughters and it's sad for sons. I was a 14-year-old when my parents divorced, and I was one of those statistics. Literacy gap. So you can see in Washington, it's not a secret that boys compared to girls are underperforming in their ELA, their English and Language Arts scores. For example, grades 6 to 8 over this approximately 10-year period that data was analyzed, you had 60% of girls meeting or exceeding standards in English Language Arts compared to 49% of boys. The Brookings Institution found that Seattle was the second most severe major city in the country in terms of the gap between boys and girls in English, with the greater Seattle area, the group Seattle, Bellevue, and Everett, girls outperforming boys by basically a full grade level on average. We'd love to see more men as elementary school teachers. That's an area where I think there's some role for public policy, for acknowledging that society will be served with greater gender diversity among our teaching workforce. And this statistic up here is from the Washington Professional Educator Standards Board, where in a document last year, they said they're acknowledging a significant discrepancy between the gender and racial demographics of teachers compared to students. I've seen many good efforts and language used around acknowledging the racial need for more racial diversity. I haven't seen comparable, anywhere near comparable acknowledgement of the need for gender diversity. And last few statistic slides here, focusing on enrollment in higher education. Again, this is a high-profile one. It's no secret that men are a minority gender-wise on college campuses. So in Washington, looking at our 4-year public universities, undergrad degrees earned, 43% male. Post-grad degrees earned, 42% male, again, at our 4-year public universities. And among community and technical college enrollment, 42% male. A few additional statistics. Males are 74% of deaths specifically from opioid overdoses. Earlier we looked at drugs overall, but opioid, 74%. 2/3 of deaths from alcohol abuse. Males are 85% of those in jail. Jails, of course, are different from prison because cities and counties operate jails, whereas prison is a state-operated thing. Missing persons, majority are men. Males are a majority of high school dropouts, people injured at work, majority of homicide victims, as well as people killed during military service. So that was a lot of statistics. I appreciate you following along. We have one-pagers for the Commission on Boys and Men legislation at the table in the back. Some of these same statistics are there. This set of slides, the statistic slides, are also on our website. And I try to update them quarterly or periodically because I want the statistics to be as current as possible. So now let me find my spot in my notes here. Okay. Sometimes male issues or male disparities are hard for the average person to see because they're sort of hidden in the popular coverage of these issues. I'm not sure how often this is intentional and how often it's unintentional, but I'd like to show you a good example of this. Boys are the large majority of students who are being restrained and isolated by adults in schools for reasons related to their behavior. And in recent years, Washington lawmakers and the media have shined attention on our practice of restraining and isolating kids in schools, which, according to an ACLU report, doing that restraining and isolating can be, quote, emotionally and psychologically damaging and profoundly impactful. So this issue is often covered with a great deal of compassion and sometimes righteous indignation on behalf of these children. However, boys belong to a category of people that it seems to me we tend to be uncomfortable associating with anything like disadvantage or disproportionate suffering. That is, boys are males. So when media outlets covered this issue of restraint and isolation in schools, what I noticed is they all mentioned the disproportionate impacts of this problem on various groups: elementary school students, students with disabilities, low-income students, Black students, but all of them didn't mention the word boys or male students even once. And I think this is a good example of how boys' issues or disparities affecting our male population can be kind of hidden. By the way, another issue where I've seen this a lot, this lack of including the male piece of the story, is the coverage of the opioid crisis and the human toll of drug overdoses. Right now, I want to say it's important that we be able to see two things that are true at the same time. The first is that disparities affecting males are usually most severe among Washington's Black and Native American boys and men. The second thing that's also true is that boys and men's issues do very much cut across racial and ethnic lines. So the state level statistics that I showed you earlier were comparing all boys and men in the state to all girls and women without regard to race. But whenever we do have data sets that allow for double disaggregation, meaning we can disaggregate by both sex or gender and race or ethnicity, what we see is that these male gender gaps exist within each racial category. That is undeniable evidence to me that there is a male sex or male gender component to what's going on here that is worth looking at carefully. Another thing that's worth looking at carefully is whether we are underinvesting in boys and men. So this graphic shows the results of a little research project that I did where I used the largest database of grant makers and grants, and I filtered just to show grants serving people in Washington. It uses tax documents, so it's a bit out of date, but 2017 to 2021. And what I found is a total dollar value of grants. These are government grants, philanthropic grants, grants from all kinds of sources. Total dollar value of grants serving women and girls in Washington of over $700 million, and a total dollar value of grants serving boys and men in Washington of under $200 million. We may be underinvesting in our boys and men. So back to this idea of creating a state-level government commission on boys and men. You might be wondering, where do the legislators that represent districts right around here stand on this? So on this slide, we're showing District 36, where we are now, District 43, 34, 37. The names in bold are legislators that we have already connected with. We've had at least one conversation with. And legislators whose name is in bold and underlined, just Julia Reed in this case, is a legislator who's already a co-sponsor of the legislation. Now a quick story about Representative Joe Fitzgibbon that I think is suitable for the Braver Angels theme and that connects with Nicky, who you'll be hearing from soon, because Nicky is a constituent of District 34, which includes West Seattle, parts of Burien, I believe, and Vashon Island. So Representative Joe Fitzgibbon was the House Majority Leader a few years ago. He still is, I believe. And as the House Majority Leader, he was in a media session with members of the media. And one of the members of the media named Drew Mickelson, who works for King 5, he asked the question, why not give a hearing to the Commission on Boys and Men bill? This was year 2 of now 4 years that we've had this legislation in front of legislators and haven't received a hearing on the bill. A hearing is the first step of many steps to get a bill passed. So Drew Mickelson, in his role as a reporter, asked, why not give a hearing? And Rep. Fitzgibbon's answer acknowledged that they see some disparities affecting the male population. I think he mentioned youth suicides. He might have mentioned something related to violence. But the headline that a media outlet put together based on his comments was highlighting the words, historically most advantaged. So he did say something along the lines of, we're reluctant to create a commission for a group of people that is historically most advantaged. So, this was covered in the media, and I don't know then what happened in terms of who Rep. Fitzgibbon may have heard from, but we wanted to pursue a conversation, see where people lie on these issues, see what misunderstandings they might have about where we're coming from with this, and see what genuine concerns they have about it. So we did pursue that conversation. And just a few months after he said this in the media, 3 of us volunteer advocates met with him, and we saw that even already by that point, he had somewhat of a mind shift, and he was kind of coming to that conversation prepared to say, hey, I regret the way I phrased that. I regret, basically, he seemed to acknowledge that you can have groups that are both advantaged in some ways and that experience disadvantages, and both of those things can be the same, true at the same time. Then, more recently, Nicky and I met with him in person, and to me, he seemed very much comfortable by this point with the proposal for a commission on boys and men. He brought his daughter. It was a great conversation. He was on board, it seemed to me. And through conversation, through not condemning, at least on the part of the advocates, the media might have had their own agenda for highlighting what they highlighted, but sticking with, being persistent, having those conversations results in this kind of understanding. And now, today, where are we at? I can sort of break some news here. I have permission from Representative April Berg to share that she plans on helping us move this initiative forward in a way that I think to me is going to be game changing. I shouldn't say initiative, I should say bill, this legislation. So my understanding is Rep. Berg plans on convening some stakeholder meetings, and it looks like plans on sponsoring her own proposal for a commission on boys and men. And she is a Democratic, progressive, female woman of color in the legislature who has raised a son and daughters and who sees the need here. And I believe this is the kind of game-changing political support that will enable Washington State to do something historic. And I think it's coming very soon because the 2026 legislative session starts in January. These stakeholder meetings that she plans on convening are supposed to happen soon. And I think we're on the cusp of achieving something significant by being the first state in the nation to have a commission on boys and men. Wouldn't it be fantastic if a blue state, a state with a fairly large population like Washington, was the first? I'll conclude by saying advocacy for boys and men needs to join the mainstream in discussions of public policy. It needs a seat at the table. What a significant step that the creation of a commission on boys and men would be toward that goal. Thank you, and now I'd like to hand it over to Nicky.
Thank you. Yeah, and honestly, Blair is one of the most diligent researchers and collectors of good information that I've come across in this work. So thank you, Blair. So again, my name is Nicky Wilks. For 10 years, I've served as executive director and co-founder at Journeymen Institute. We're based on Vashon Island, but we serve broadly across mostly Western Washington through really a collection of programs that I'll share more about in a moment. But our vision statement here really feels in so much congruence with the vision and I think the mission that Blair shared for the Institute of Boys and Men. And I'll just preface this by saying I'm tight on time, and my aim here is to share some stories that hopefully will seed some of the conversations in Q&A to follow. I'm going to give almost 0 data points. So let's start with just some programs that we run. Direct services, youth mentoring, camps, and rites of passage. When I say rite of passage, how many of you know what I mean by that? Have a context for what that means? That's awesome. When I started doing this work, I would get maybe 1 or 2 hands in the room most of the time. And really what we're aiming to do is provide transformational, affirming experiences for boys as they move towards becoming a young man. And for many of us, raise your hand if you had a meaningful rite of passage when you became an adult. Okay. We create curriculum. So we work with school partners here in Seattle, on Vashon, and in Tacoma, delivering social and emotional learning experiences for boys and young men. And we do a lot of training, particularly for educators and teachers. I'm glad you spotlighted Jerome because he's been a big partner of ours and his creation of the Seattle School for Boys, but also many other schools, both public and private, which is something I want to highlight. 10 years ago, we had almost 0 interest from public schools, and that's changing, which I'm very grateful for. Some of our core values are listed down there. And I want to share a little bit about our origin story. So this is a bit of a vulnerable share for me, but this is me and my best friend, also co-founder Alex. And this is sometime around age 18. I'm probably blackout drunk in this photo. By the time I graduated high school, I was addicted to alcohol, and by all reasonable measures, I was successful. Nobody was looking out for me. If it wasn't for a timely conversation with the drug and alcohol counselor because I got suspended at school, for possession, I don't know that I'd be standing here right now. And the hidden part of your presentation really speaks to me, Blair, because nobody thought anything was wrong. I was a time bomb, and I'm so grateful for that counselor in that conversation. Alex and my experience as boys and young men, compounded with being involved in youth work as coaches and educators, spawned the creation of Journeymen. And so this is one of the early photos of one of our mentoring groups when we first started. And I want to say it's super grassroots. A lot of times it was just a few of us collecting any boys and young men that were willing to hang out and creating spaces where they felt safe and affirmed and encouraged to be themselves. So this is a video that I'm not going to share just due to time, but I will maybe send it out as a link afterward. So I want to share some early lessons. We have this fun phrase called journey moms at Journeymen, and these are the moms that are champions of our work. And one of the things that we realized early on was, and I want to say naively, a lot of our early messaging was like, let's speak to the dads and the men so that they will get their boys involved in this work. And that did not work. In fact, we got a lot of doubt and criticism, and people would say, this is a weird cult. You're probably a bunch of pervs. You know, like it was really hard and interesting. And it was moms, and primarily single moms, who saw the need. And they were just like, oh my God, you're going to work with my boy? Yeah. Please. And these lessons were so important for us because, for one, it was a reality check, but for others, it was highlighting something that was, I think, culturally interesting too. So I'm going to do an extremely short introduction to a myth that underpins a lot of our work. Has anyone ever heard of the myth Iron John? Great, there's a few in the room. Robert Bly does this myth incredible justice in a book, and actually the audiobook is my recommendation because you get his raspy voice telling the story. In this myth, there's a kingdom, right? And like many kingdoms, there's a king and a queen, and there's a prince. And one day, a traveler comes through and learns that the knights had been disappearing in this dark forest. And this traveler says, well, I can go figure out what's going on. I know what to do. And the king says, sure, I've lost all my best knights, but if you want to go try to find out and help, go ahead. And so this traveler goes in and ends up finding at the bottom of a murky pond this wild man with hair down to the ground, and just, he was hairy and brown and all sorts of wildness. And they locked him in a cage. And in the myth, the boy was very curious about this wild man. And one day he's playing with his golden ball and it rolls into the cage. And he begs the wild man to let him out. And he says, no, 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 boy. I'll only give you your ball back if you get me out of here. And what do you think the boy did?
Let him out.
He let him out. Yeah, he didn't at first. So in the myth, he actually hesitates. And then later he can say, I really want that ball. So he goes, I want to let you out. I don't know how to do that. And Iron John gives him a tip. And that tip is where I'm going to end the story, because the tip, he says, the key to my cage is underneath your mother's pillow. And that myth has just been so interesting to see how it plays out in this work. So staying curious, I was always wondering, where are all the men, dads, and elders? Right? Where are the elders in our society? We started creating experiences where we could invite elders in and honor the generations, but also creating father and son experiences where we could focus on that bond. For the dads who are willing to show up, creating experiences where they could process maybe their trauma and journey of becoming a man and share that courageously with their boys, right? Very, very few men who come into our work ever had a dad that intimately bonded with them at an emotional level. It's not a 0%, but it's very low. And we wanted to change that. And finally, learning from mistakes. And this key question, when did being exclusive become exclusive? So interesting to me. So one day I got a phone call, and this happened all the time. Phone call, hey, so are you guys like a religious thing? I'm like, no, we don't have a religious context. We want to be an open place for people who have spiritual beliefs or not. Oh, okay. Would you consider yourself inclusive? On the phone, I was like, yeah, for sure. It's really important for us to be an inclusive space for any boy or young man that wants to come in. And this mother on the phone goes, okay, we're not looking for that, and hung up the phone. And my heart ached in that moment because I didn't know this boy that she was calling on behalf of, but I wondered about his experience. I wondered about what his house felt like. And I wondered what part of being inclusive was not going to work for their family. And I ached because of what I believed might be possible if we could work with him. And it's phone calls like that that have me really feeling convicted about the work of Braver Angels and asking the question, how do we create more access points so that every boy or young man has the support they need to thrive? And this will be my last piece here. So I call it Pride and Dignity, a case study. A couple of years ago, I was invited to speak at a young men's conference. This was here in Seattle, and I had a room of about 100 boys and male educators. And early in my presentation, I polled the room. And I said, how many of you would say that you're proud to be a boy or a man today? Now I'm going to ask this group, how many do you think raised their hand?
5.
None, 5, half, 10, 15.
Did you say how many in this group are proud to be a boy or a man?
No, this is the room that I asked. So how many do you think raised their hand in that room? There's 100 in the room. Yeah, about 100.
Less than 10%.
Less than 10. I didn't count, but it was between 10 and 15. So then I asked a follow-up question, which is, now imagine that there's girls and women in the room with us, that it's a gender diverse room. How many of you would raise your hand then?
All of them.
It's so interesting. I'm hearing all, I'm hearing none.
35.
None. Finally, one courageous young guy raises his hand. And I was like, oh, this is fascinating. And I said, are you raising your hand because you would or because you want to share? And he goes, no, I want to share. And I said, oh, that's awesome. What do you want to say? And he's like, I think it would be really hard because I do want to raise my hand, but I don't want them to feel like they think I'm better than them. And what I was observing in real time was the experience of so many boys and young men today who are afraid to speak their truth, to even say, I'm a good human. I'm proud of who I am because of cancel culture.
Yes.
And I got to be in it in real time. And again, my heart ached for this because I'm like, if this was a girls and young women's conference and I was a female empowerment speaker, how many girls and women would raise their hand in that?
All right.
Every single one of them in the room. I think we all know that. It'd be like, boom, hands up, right? And that's what we want for our boys and girls. We don't want girls putting their hands down. We want our boys and young men saying, I feel good about who I am, right? I'm proud to be who I am. And I know who I am, right? That's been a big part of our work. Do you know who you are on the inside? So thanks for hearing some of my stories. I hope this provides some depth and maybe some richness as we move towards Q&A and some of the conversations to follow. And I'm really grateful for the time with you all today. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you so much to think about. I want to welcome and thank Peter Moot, who is one of our Brave Angels volunteers who has moderator training and will facilitate our Q&A session. So have your questions ready. Questions of curiosity for both of our speakers. Can I help manage anything? You got it.
Okay. I think we'll start with just some individuals asking some questions about what we've heard. Yes.
Thank you, Peter.
Mhm.
My name is Rick. Nice to meet you. Thank you so much. I have a question for you, Blair. It's around.
Forgot, we are trying
Oh,
to record
okay.
this. So.
All right.
Thank you.
I have a question for you, Blair, and this is around the empowerment for men and boys alongside the movement of equality of men and women, and the message that we've seen in the last 50 years or so to try to create equality between men and women in the workplace, access to jobs, etc. And how have you seen that affect boys and men along the lines that you're presenting?
Well, I'm a fairly young guy. I'm 38, and so I wasn't around when some other issues were more prevalent than there are today. I guess all I can really add a value there is to say that because of the range of areas where we see male gender gaps or male disparities, I argue that advocacy for boys and men is needed. I think that gender-based discrimination, honestly, and prejudice exists in all directions. I think it's not uniquely affecting women and girls, but it also in certain ways affects men and boys. So I will say I do tend to focus on outcomes. I focus on stuff that's measurable because a main part of my audience is lawmakers. I'm trying to be a grassroots political, advocate. And so lawmakers often want to see data. They want to hear stories as well, and that's where partnering with people who are good storytellers is important to me because that's one of my weaknesses. So I look for the statistics related to health and education because those are two of the state's main priorities. Government spends a lot of money on health-related things and education-related things. So I just point to those areas where we're seeing poor outcomes for our male population and just make sure that we care about this too. And does our vision for equity, for example, and does our vision for gender equality include boys and men's issues? I think a lot of people are becoming comfortable with saying yes to that now. I think some people still need to be won over, in my view, but I think a lot of people are saying, you know what, when we say equity, when we say equality, yes, I wasn't really aware of these issues very much, but now that you're helping me be aware of these issues, yes, I think those should be included too. Those boys and men's issues should be included too.
Does Nicky, Nicky, do you have any comments on that question?
No, it's not really an issue that I could really add substance to. Thank you.
Do we have any more questions here? Yes.
Hello, my name is Michael. I'm the regional director for Let Me Run, and here with my colleague Jen. I think one of the things that we engage with, and I have some questions on, is how to. I love how you mentioned, right, being inclusive is not exactly exclusive, but also the interesting disparities that, like, as we have a boy-focused program, it can be offensive to schools and other organizations that we want to engage with. And we have a partnership with a reflective female organization, but our job is to focus on the health and wellness and emotional development of young boys. I think it can be a challenging conversation because the moment we say that and present our offerings, it can be immediately met with pushback, and there can be a lot of triggers around it. And I think there can be assumptions that there's this type of patriarchal theme in what we're doing when really we're just trying to develop young boys. And so I wanted to open the question to kind of both of you guys. You guys navigate in having a boys and men focused dialogue without it being, or even navigating that type of pushback.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I want to share both from a place of what's possible now and also where I'd like this to go, because currently a lot of my conversations are they're sort of based on a rationale that if we work with boys and young men, everybody benefits. So school partners, when I have a conversation with a principal or an educator, and they're like, what's the hardest, I ask them, like, well, what are you struggling with, right? What are the challenges? And 8 times out of 10, probably there's like, the boys and young, especially middle school, right? Like Jerome was saying, we don't know what to do. We need help. And I'm like, great, we can help. And the interesting thing is currently the conversation has to be that so everybody else benefits too. So their female peers in the classroom can focus better, or, there's less disruption. But my vision for that conversation is actually boys and men are worth helping because they're humans, that it could stop there. Both can be true, right? Both of these things can be true in that. And unfortunately, that currently doesn't feel good enough, especially, I would say, in the educational space right now. Like helping them on the behalf that they deserve dignity and care that's appropriate for them at age and stage, especially with children. That's something that really boils my blood a bit. We're talking about children.
Right.
And that isn't enough still. And I feel like it's changing, and I'm very grateful for that.
Blair, do you have any comments on? We have another question in the back.
I'm a little pulled on this, so if you can you hear me okay? No.
Someone else could hold the mic for you.
Listen.
Good. I'm Bob Farr. Blair, you were at my home on Mercer Island with David Jackham, I don't know, 8 months ago, something like that. And this article appeared in the New York Times on August 17th, 2 months ago. This is in the opinion section, probably one of the most profound sections of the New York Times, in my opinion. And the title of it is Lonely, Detached, and Isolated, Today's Young Men Are Adrift. We faced this problem a century ago. We can solve the boy crisis again. The authors of this piece were Robert Putnam, who wrote a book called Bowling Alone, and Richard Reeves, who Blair spoke of earlier. And I just mention this because there is movement afoot at not just the foot level, but the head level, perhaps higher, very high in this country, about trying to get a grip on this problem. And I'd be happy to talk to anybody else about this before I turn it over about the article about Robert Putnam and his ideas surrounding bowling alone.
Thank you.
I'll just add, this is a photo of Richard and me at the state capitol next to the floor. He has shown great interest in what we're trying to accomplish here in Washington. We're exceedingly grateful for the cooperation of Richard Reeves of the American Institute for Boys and Men with what we're trying to do here. There was an announcement this past week, there's an announcement out of Virginia that the Speaker of the House of Virginia is initiating, they did a press conference to announce we're going to have legislation coming up in 2026 to create a Virginia Commission on Boys and Men, essentially. And that's Democrat-led, I believe, in that state. And Richard is just a game changer on the national level. And I want to say that being involved in the men's and boys advocacy political movement, it's a pretty small group of people who have this passion and who stick with it for any length of time. And some people feel like Richard has come onto the scene more recently and gotten a lot of attention. And Richard has done a marvelous job. And so I am not going to say anything negative about Richard, and I never will. He has done a marvelous job of navigating how to appeal to such a wide audience of people to appeal to bring boys and men's issues into the mainstream, and to respect the work that was done before him. Because it does go back decades. And in a way, he's kind of new on the scene, but you need new leaders, you need fresh faces, you need smart people who can speak in a certain way that reaches people. Richard's done a great job with that. And yeah, that piece in the New York Times with Robert Putnam was superb.
Very fun. Let's see, we have one here and then one more behind me here.
I'm going to do a little pushback here. This is sports season, and now almost every night on television, we see these males bashing each other playing football, and males outrunning each other in baseball. And occasionally I'll see a woman doing a play-by-play in a football game. But basically, professional sports are so dominated by men, and women are beginning to make foothold into sports, but it's a small foothold. And I'd like to know how you see the role of sports in addressing the issues of men and boys.
I think I have to draw from my own experience as a competitive athlete here and just say that if it wasn't for competitive sports, I also probably wouldn't be standing here right now. And I speak from a place of like needing a safe enough place to exert a whole lot of energy. And in terms of like access and equity, I also feel like more is possible. And I think the strides that you're mentioning to me do feel like progress. And I also can't speak from a place of like expertise on what maybe the final product of that vision would be. But I can also say that, including, for example, like my daughter and taking my kids to sports games and going to the Storm game is something that I'm committed to doing so that she has an image of, hey, this is something that is available to you. And I'm so grateful that in a city like Seattle and probably other places around the country, there are options for both participation and being a fan. And that wasn't really a thing when I was a kid. So I think we've made progress, and I hope that continues so that, again, girls and women and anybody, it feels like they have a pathway to the joy and experience and whatever goodness comes through participation in sports.
Hey, this is Blair Daly with CKMD Army. Blair, this question is specifically for you. We know it's an unpopular notion that men and boys need help, and so when you're working with lawmakers or specifically legislators, I know you've come across a point where some of them are afraid to speak up on this because they're afraid of recoil or for their political aspect of jeopardizing their seat or whatever. Do you see that changing anytime soon? I mean, I'm sure you got more support than when we first started this journey. You got 12 legislators now, but when we first started, I think you only had 6 at the time. So have you seen any breakthrough in that stereotype where people aren't really afraid of losing their political stronghold because they're siding with that?
I do. I see hope. I see somewhat of a breakthrough. To be frank, it's no secret that the election in 2024 from the Democratic Party side has increased interest in boys and men's issues, perhaps, at least as a voting bloc. I think putting in the work and just showing that you're credible and that you're a reasonable person goes a long way. I mentioned earlier about what I didn't see was any high quality, sustained advocacy for boys and for men. And we've been doing it for 5 years now, and we're just showing up time after time. And I'm finding people to partner with, people who are also high quality, credible people who are prepared when they come into these conversations with legislators, and they make a good impression. They know how to talk to lawmakers. They know what their ask should be. They know how to respect their time. And now we're at the place, like I showed earlier, that a progressive female Democratic legislator wants to carry this forward. I think this is somewhat of a hot issue. I think it's gone from being few people will talk about it to a fairly cool issue, maybe. And whether it's coming from the standpoint of we want to help boys and men because of the harm that they're doing to others, or if it's going that full place that I agree with Nicky that we should aspire to, which is we want to help boys and men because they're human beings. I think there's so many points of connection that you can find something in common with people from all kinds of backgrounds that are like, yeah, I see the need for this. I want to help you. I want to cooperate in this. And we really have had so much cooperation. It really is so grassroots. I'll stop there.
Bill, other questions? Yes, that's good.
Sorry, a little over the road here a little bit, but about the pride, that question doesn't maybe work the way you designed it. I think pride is something people have when they're told they're not supposed to have it. And so it's like, are you proud that you have 2 eyes? Well, I just take for granted I have 2 eyes, right? You can take for granted you don't need to have pride in something. So the pride measure may not be a good measure. Regarding your presentation, Blair, having references at the bottom, fantastic. Really is high quality stuff you got going on there. Thank you. But at the beginning, you mentioned a council about disparities. Is that right? Am I getting that?
Health Disparities Council, yeah.
Thank you. I didn't get the name. And I think it was Nicky that referred to when did inclusion become exclusionary, or maybe it was. Why are we trying to make that Health Disparities Council more inclusionary instead of making another exclusionary council, only focused on men and boys, exclusionary, instead of making the councils that exist more inclusionary?
Yeah, thanks for your question. To address that, I would say, one, if we have a Health Disparities Council, and if it's going to have a gender focus, then we should make that Health Disparities Council fully gender inclusive. Second, if we have gender-based commissions already that aren't going anywhere, as we do with a Women's Commission and an LGBTQ Commission, then we should go the full measure and make that inclusive by creating a commission on boys and men. The idea has been floated at times, like what if you combine the Women's Commission and a Men's Commission? I find that people have certain passions that set themselves up, that having a women's and men's commission or something like that would be awkward, would be not ideal. I think people they combine their lived experiences and then their passions in a direction that a women's commission should be staffed by people who have a lot of passion for women's issues and a lot of knowledge and expertise on that. A commission on boys and men, same thing. I could also see a perfectly fine vision for government and for how we operate society that we don't have these demographic-based commissions at all, and that our expectation for our representatives in legislatures is that they be informed about all kinds of issues and that they adequately represent the issues of every gender, every race, and so on and so forth. That's also a legitimate approach. But I'm dealing with the facts on the ground in Washington State, where we have these commissions already. They're not going anywhere. We're leaving out advocacy or concern for boys and men's issues in a variety of ways, and I think we can do better.
You're leaving out people who want actual inclusion and fairness. You can have two exclusionary groups go feeding into the subgroups, feeding into an inclusionary group. That would solve maybe both compositions.
We are at a point where we're going to do some breakout groups, and maybe that question could be discussed a little bit further, because we're going to come back then and talk about what happened in the breakout groups. So Ingrid, how do we set that up?
Sure, thank you. So we're suggesting groups of 3, if you don't mind slightly moving your chairs, if possible, get with somebody you don't already know. And when you get your group of 3, we're only gonna have 10 minutes, so keep everything short, please, about 2 to 3 minutes per person. But your name, where you're from, and then is there something you heard today that surprised you? And